Zach, it's great seeing you. It's been literally a decade since we helped you, and I didn't recognize you.
I did
You were-
the beard.
Well, you were 12 years old, and
Yeah.
I'm just very happy and fulfilled about how your life has worked out. Do you remember when you came to us? You were in middle school. Do you remember what life was like for you back then?
I mean, as with memories being memories, seventh grade. I don't know if that's descriptive at all, but I don't really remember too much of the lack of focus. I just know that I wasn't turning in papers and stuff, and I still was like learning. And the cognitive side of the teacher talking to me would be great. I would learn. I'd do great on tests, but I couldn't focus on tasks and couldn't do like the homework, and I couldn't sit down for a set amount of time and just kind of be a normal amount of focused. I'd get fidgety, or I'd get anxious, or I'd need to go and I'd get distracted easily, essentially. And I guess around that time of when I came in, 7th grade, there was always that want to be more able to be focused, but just not knowing how, I guess.
So you remember very clearly that even though you were a bright kid, things were more difficult and uneven in your achievement than you would have liked it to have been.
I mean, there was the actual, like, you could see the grades. They weren't as good as I knew they could be. I knew my mom knew they could be better. I would do amazing on the tests, and I would get like the in-class stuff done perfectly, but as soon as the class was done, it was kind of in the back sector of my brain, and just couldn't remember how to or to do the work.
In those days, it would take a minimum of 40 treatments of neurofeedback. Today, it's a minimum of 32. In our field, technology is always advancing. We have most of our technology today was not available when we treated you, but you were very successful. It just took a little bit longer in those days. What do you remember got better for you? What changed? What did you learn? By the time you finished treatment, how were you different? Well, how was your life better? How was it easier for you to stay focused? Was it automatic, or did you remind yourself to focus where before you had no way to remind yourself to focus? What changed that?
It's very subconscious kind of thing where one day, I know it's over 40 sessions, or now over 32, but one day it was kind of in your memory bank where you were doing poorly, and then you'd kind of see the results, and then my dad would be able to tell me, like, hey, you kind of have these tools, remember what Drake taught you, and just kind of trying refocusing, and I had that ability after going to drink for a certain amount of, or for however many sessions, and I would see the results that were actually in class, and I would see my grades improving, and I would actually be able to I would turn in the work, and I would be just overall better at it. So it's very much subconscious as far as when you get done with it, or when you kind of flip a switch, but you can see the results, and that's kind of at the point where you're like, oh wow, this has actually changed how I think and how I can focus, and I would be able to not be as fidgety. Like, when you are fidgety and you don't realize it, other people are obviously realizing it, like my mom or my dad or my stepdad, and when you aren't, you kind of don't realize when you're not fidgety anymore because you didn't realize it in the first place. But when you have the positive reinforcement of your family that's like, you're actually doing better, you can kind of realize it at that point.
Could you feel by time 8th, 9th grade that school was better for you? You were more consistent, you were more confident?
Yeah. I mean, I always had this plan to go to a four-year college. I was pretty much determined, once I realized that I was at the top of my class for a lot of my classes, that I can get into a four-year college. So when I started researching this stuff in high school, and I had the ability to focus, once I set out a plan, I ended up going through high school with essentially flying colors, because I had a set plan of each of the classes that I needed to take, and each of how I needed to do well in each of the classes, and there was this kind of end goal that was very much driving to go through a 4-year college. And that, coupled with the skills of Drake and the organization that I've picked up and all the ability to focus, it allowed me to just kind of thrive throughout college. I mean, I took 6 AP classes throughout college and passed all of them, and I like scored 5s on half of them too. So it allowed me to learn the material better than I was already learning something, and get the good grades as well. And also it translated into my everyday life, where I would not be as fidgety or anxious, or I would kind of be more normal, I guess, in a sense.
That's great. Great. When we were speaking earlier today, you told me that at some point earlier in your treatment here, years ago, sometimes your dad would remind you to focus.
Yeah.
But now you had a focusing response that you had a reference point of how to turn on your focusing system. Before you went through the neurofeedback treatment here, you had no way to turn on your attentional system. What the neurofeedback did was it helped you develop your attentional system.
Yeah.
Zach, you know, there was, I told you earlier today, there was a study done recently that it was published out of University of Montreal Hospital, and it was the first of its kind. They did MRI brain scans of the brain of people going through neurofeedback training before they started treatment and then at the very end of their treatment program. And they discovered that the areas of the brain involved with focus, sustained attention, auditory and visual attention, actually became larger, developed more volume in the brain, the ones that did the neurofeedback compared to ones that didn't do it. Furthermore, pathways in the brain, like connections that are involved in the different structures of the brain involved with attention, those pathways actually got larger and got more developed, the physical connections. So you're actually changing your brain physically, developing it like a muscle developing when you do neurofeedback. This first study ever. So when you finish treatment, though we didn't do a before and after MRI brain scan,
Yeah.
you can assume that your brain was much more developed than it was before treatment. So when you do neurofeedback, in a sense, I tell parents this all the time, it's physical therapy for the brain, but because you're internally generating the response, you're learning it as a skill. So when you're back out in school the next day or with homework, not only is your brain more developed, Zach, but you've learned a skill that made it that way.
Yeah.
So you have a reference point of refocusing if you ever need to. When you take the drug, once the drug wears off, you have no control over your attentional system. Your brain's different. It's going through a drug withdrawal. With neurofeedback, it's a very different process.
And I'm happy to say that I've never had to use ADD medication. So.
Well, I'm real proud of you. We're all very proud of you here at Drake, as are your parents. And you graduated UC Santa Cruz.
I did.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you've got a new full-time career.
Yep. Yeah. Go banana slugs. Yeah, that's our mascot.
Is there anything that, any kind of advice you would want to give future patients that, need inspiration or motivation to be able to help themselves like you helped yourself, the benefit of what you learned?
I mean, I very much liked the fact that I got it done kind of at the peak of where my focus was being lost.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the like kind of pure ADD sides of things, so it's more, I guess, to parents, because they're going to be able to recognize that the patient or their child needs some sort of help. It 100% has changed my life for the positive. So I went from it essentially it unlocks some potential within the kid. Like you have this potential that you don't fully get by not being able to focus and learn about your surrounding world at that key point in time, like middle school through high school. And because of Drake, I was able to fully get through that crucial time in my life. And now I'm here.
Well, we're just so pleased and happy for you, and it just fulfills us. It's why we do what we do, Zach. And I just wish you so much more success in the years to come.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
Of course.